different. But what we're attempting to ponder here is sort of the larger context around social co-ops, and as we say, the problem they're solving or hope to solve. So I'm going to share my screen at this point and then try to talk through a little bit of that. Okay. Everybody see that okay? So here's a couple of thoughts I want to lead off with, because this has come home to me in the last few months in a way more than it had, I think, before. And that is, I think there isn't a tendency when you first discover cooperativism and all of that to begin looking for something technical here, a form, a model that we can kind of abstract and communicate, and somehow, we can be satisfied with that, as though we've really got the whole idea. And so one of the first things I want to say, and I know that this will resonate with many of you, is that co-ops just in general are not simply a form. They come out of something. They come out of history. They come out of a certain situation. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, and Matthew and I have discovered in our research around social co-ops in Italy, in Quebec, and in South Korea, for starters, that there really is a kind of an economic resistance behind the co-op vision. It is not merely one more corporate farm, however, the IRS might see it, but there's something that comes with it that is bigger than simply the abstraction of a particular corporate form, which I think most people here get. So, and here is a very good example of what I'm talking about. If you read Jessica Gordon Nimhard's book, you discover that while co-ops, certainly in some neighborhoods, are kind of a new subject, in, for example, the Black community in America, they're an old subject, and they go back a long way, including as far back as W.B. Du Bois, who actually taught a class on co-op economics in Georgia many years ago. And you can go back before that to the Knights of Labor and so on. Anyway, so we found this to be true in Italy, and, as I say, Quebec and South Korea as well. And I'm getting to, in a moment, why this reminder seems kind of important. The co-ops, we might want to add, have been misused in history. And I think it's in John Roustakis' book that he points out, it's a neutral form that can be used for good or ill. So good to remind ourselves of that. There's not an automatic benefit necessarily to having a co-op. For example, if we're making, weapons of mass destruction or whatever. So, but now I want to go to, having said that, I want to go to the vision around social co-ops. And this is really, the ideal story, as we've been picking it up from what we've been learning with these examples in other countries. The goal here and the power of the idea is that we might have the ability, if we could organize well enough, to create new, ideally living wage jobs, even for people who are marginalized workers, especially women of color, if we're talking about the care economy. That's a pretty amazing idea. Every day, everywhere, we are pretty much told that's just not likely. That's not going to happen. There is not the wherewithal, there is not the resources to make that happen if we're just dealing with the marketplace, which mostly is what we're dealing with. Another aspect of this is that in cooperativism, we have the skills and the insights to create work which has dignity, because that is part of the cooperative vision. And that's a very interesting thing because many jobs today offer very little dignity to the worker. A democratic workplace is also an exotic notion for the most part still. Further, and this is the typical kind of co-op process, you're talking about empowering people through the experiences they have in the co-op, switching around through different roles. And so, it's like being in a school in a certain way. It's like your MBA program, right? On the ground. But one way of describing this collective process is something they do in Quebec. They refer to collective or group entrepreneurship, which sounds like an oxymoron, but is actually a powerful way of sort of noting that you need a certain kind of entrepreneurial energy to keep the co-op going. Everybody's contributing in various ways, but they're not contributing only to their own well-being, right? So that's important. And the last thing, which I'm going to get to again from a different angle in a moment, is social innovation and the idea that not all innovation is the same. And I want to come back to that in a moment. But what I think I've been impressed with, particularly in the Italian model, is that the younger people that are running these social co-ops say to government and they say to the private market, we're doing something that we think we're very good at that probably you can't do as well. And that is, we know this community context, we know the people we're trying to serve, and we are creating real social innovation in a particular way. And it's because of our process, which is co-creation, democratic workplace, multi-stakeholder, and so on. But this is our secret sauce in a way. So that is powerful, and it's not necessarily the way that nonprofits, let's say, in the U.S. talk, but it's very interesting because it's a powerful message, and it is about, as I say, real innovation as opposed to the other kind. There's a benefit for the people that the co-op are serving, of course, and the main one, and the main reason that this model is used is because they deliver high quality care. And so when you interview people, the caregivers, the care recipients, in any one of these countries, the data show that there's a very high degree of satisfaction with care that is bottom up and that is co-created. It's like saying, we own the care. This is something we came up with. So naturally, we want it to be right. And naturally, we're happy with it. So that's a very powerful thing. Another piece of this is that these kinds of services can also lead the recipients in a new direction. And so in Italy, a type A co-op, which for example might work with people coming out of addiction, often can partner up with a type B co-op, which is workforce integration. In other words, there's a spectrum. It's all about kind of reintegrating people into society in a happy, productive way. And we tend to sort of break that process into pieces. But the vision, ideally, is of a spectrum that works together in an ecosystem. You're also offering people that you serve a way to become part of this ecosystem, whether that's as a community member or a volunteer. Social co-ops even have a membership category for volunteers often. Or you could go further and actually become a board member as either a volunteer, a donor, just a community member, or someone who was a recipient of the services at one point. So that is a powerful difference as well. For local communities and local government, this is a story that they've used in Quebec with great success, which is to say, what we're doing here is creating highly localized work. This work is not going to go away. No, it's not going to be outsourced anywhere. So that's one thing. Secondly, we are creating enterprises that stick around because that's what the data show. And so despite the low survival rate for many smaller businesses, co-ops have a better story to tell and all that. So that's good. Moreover, Mr. Local Government Official. There's no subsidies involved here. This is not like trying to bring Amazon to town, you know. This is all homegrown, and so it's very low risk if the government will become a partner and enable us, right? Which is a very important dimension. And then finally, these enterprises automatically, because they're little ecosystems in themselves, create greater community engagement. And so that is a key benefit that's very much in the news, the way people are not engaged and the price we're paying for that. And so that's a powerful thing to talk about. So that's like if everything were perfect and if social co-ops delivered everything they could deliver, that's something like what they would look like. And it also gives you a little taste of why they're different. They feel different, look different from other kinds of co-ops. So a worker co-op is for the benefit of the worker owners, and they have, you know, community goodwill. So there is interest in benefiting the community, but primarily it's for the worker owners. Social co-ops are about the community from the get-go, and they also prioritize living wages and benefits, you know, as best they can create them for their worker owners. So it's really two different sort of atmospheres in a way, and they each have their own kind of culture and historical origins. But this is some of what we've been picking up from these models in other countries. Let me pause right there before I go to kind of this one other thing I wanted to talk about and see if anybody's got any thoughts and whether any of that made any sense. I'll go to Matthew since he raised his hand to jump in this soup.
Yeah, thanks, Elias. I mean, at least for me, yeah, this all makes a ton of sense. But of course, we've been so engaged with this that now it almost can't help but make sense. But just reflecting on a little bit of I've heard this expression come up before, this acronym TINA. I don't know if folks have heard of this before. The
Yes,
idea that there is
yes,
no alternative.
yes. There
And
is
then I
no
think it's
alternative.
just exactly like so when you're talking about like, there being a narrative that like marginalized workers can't create new living wage jobs for themselves, like that in of itself, I think is such a narrative challenge for the idea that there is no alternative, that folks can really do this for themselves and do things like bottom up and co-created care through social co-ops. Uh, I think we can't underscore that point enough about why this is
I
so
agree.
important. So yeah, I'm just really glad to be in this community of practice and keep this conversation alive.
Yeah, no, great point. Mike.
As I listen here, fabulous way to kick off the discussion. I keep having in mind that there's another group of constituents or stakeholders in social co-ops that we aren't paying much attention to, and that's the community of existing, especially large co-ops. And there ought to be a similar list of benefits for them
Hmm.
for social
Yeah.
co-ops to come into existence. I keep
Hmm.
harping on the idea that it's in the interest of of existing co-ops to engage hands-on engagement with new co-op startup and with small co-op scale up. And um, if we could unleash that energy and those resources, I think we could push this ball down the field quite a bit
Hmm.
faster. And in Italy's case, they essentially do that through
That's true.
the
That's
co-op
true.
funds that all co-ops contribute to. And you can dismiss it by saying that, well, they have to because the law says they have to contribute 3% of their profits to those co-op funds. But I wonder if the large co-ops in Italy would looking back today feel like the creation of all the social co-ops benefits them and the co-op ecosystem that they operate in. So
Mhm.
just a thought there.
Yeah, I do sense, and Matthew, tell me your thoughts on this too. When we presented this idea in Chicago a few months ago, I think what we mostly felt was people were just like unsure what this was. There was a lot of unfamiliarity. No, nobody thought, it was necessarily a bad idea, but it's just, you know, why exactly is this different? And, someone was just telling me they feel so much like nonprofits because they're doing work in areas where it's almost exclusively, nonprofits, maybe in the American context, um, but they're hybrid. They're borrowing from several different places. And another thing, I'd love to get everybody's thoughts on this. Another thing social co-ops point to is breaking down the wall between for-profit and nonprofit legal distinctions. So that's kind of interesting. And I think there's been pressure on that wall probably for a long time. And there are certainly nonprofits that have figured out how to generate earned income while staying within the IRS's guidelines. But the reason that's interesting is because even in Italy, where they seem to be doing a pretty good job with this, you will hear people saying, we have got to get out of these government contracts because the government changes. They change their mind. They're always pulling you up short. And sometimes they don't behave the way we need them to behave. So that we need to find at least a blend of revenue. And the reason for that is to maintain our independence. So if we're going to talk about co-creation and all that good stuff, then we have this tremendous challenge of just figuring out how to orchestrate that. Yeah, Abe, good to see you.
I'm sorry. Hi. Um,
Sure.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on the role of like in the community organizing part of this, if this is focused on community, what the role of critical analysis is of hegemony and cultural hegemony and how to place that in like a conjunctural analysis of institutions and their dominance and violence workers like cops and
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
and doing it in a liberatory social movement kind of way.
No, that's good. I'm not deep in this, but I'll give you two quick reactions. We're about to learn something about this because we have a conversation going with a new partner in Philadelphia who wants to bring a restorative justice project into a social co-op form. So they've got 15 restorative justice circles going right now in Philadelphia. So from a racial dimension, there's something about the power dynamic question there that's going to be really very interesting. On the larger question, just where this fits into the kind of the political arena, I'll say, as far as I've gone with this, is I can see this arguably as a form or a piece of municipalism and that movement, which I think could be liberatory. I don't think it's happening easily and quickly necessarily in many places beyond Barcelona, but it's a powerful idea. I know people working on it in LA. You guys probably do too. But that's part of it because this is not meant to be a reformist track we're on. It's meant to be dual power, I think. Matthew, what do you think about that?
Yeah, lots of swirling thoughts now. But I did want to specifically speak a little bit to what Mike was just asking. I think about like the role of large co-ops in relationship to social co-ops. And I'd actually be curious to hear your reflections on this too, Mike. But my understanding, right, is that like over time, of course, when sort of like the initial heyday of social co-ops was happening in Italy and Emilia-Romagna and across the region, really across the country rather, it very much had this, volunteer-driven, very self-help ethic that drove a lot of the initial social innovations of social co-ops. But part of the interesting and challenging thing over time has been that, adapting to systems of, government procurement and contracting and the pressures to scale has actually come simultaneously with this contribution from the 3% net profits from the larger co-ops. So there's getting to be large funds like Co-op Fund, for example, within like a co-op, one of the major consortia, that actually can create massive amounts of capital for social co-ops. And part of what we've seen then is that social co-ops have scaled to much larger sizes and they can serve much larger contracts than ever before. But it's had this sort of, associated effect of like sometimes we're actually diminishing the social innovation because of reaching larger scales and because of greater access to capital. So I think there's this interesting, both beneficial and sometimes, I wouldn't say maybe problematic is too strong of a word, but like there can be somewhat of a reining in of some of what makes these things special, actually, that comes with those. And I'm not saying good or bad. It's just like I think that's how the development has happened over time. And so I think we're also coming into a moment now with social co-ops today in Italy where they're also having to have some of the same or similar types of like identity crises where they have to try to go back to the root of like, why did we start this and what is the reason for it to all exist? I don't know. Any other thoughts there, Mike?
Interesting.
That's kind of the dilemma of the entire cooperative movement. And I grew up in the credit union world, so we've watched consolidation taking place here in the U.S. From 23,000 plus individual units now down to around 4,500. In some of the Western European countries, consolidation has become almost national in scale. You look at Rabobank and DZ Bank and Credit Agricole, and it's hard not to see that as the end game for at least the financial side of the cooperative system. I don't know what to do about it, because what happens is the internal dynamics of a cooperative, once it gets professional management, is to its chief KPI becomes growth, and growing through acquisition or combination is easier and requires less capital than slogging through organic growth. So I don't think it changes the impetus here in the U.S. to pursue forming social co-ops, and to do that you probably have to start small and local. But the fact that consolidation might happen later shouldn't deter us from the work that that you guys are doing. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
yeah. It's a reminder of how hard this is, but also makes me think of that comment that Matthew and I heard from an older Italian advocate of co-ops who was saying, by the way, yeah, it's great that here in Italy we have all this legislation. This has taken a long time to do, and so on. But my advice to you is do not wait for the government. Build it. And then what happened with us is that we did such a job building it through the 80s that by 1991, the government said, wow, you seem to have this under control. We're going to recognize what you're doing. We're going to give you tax benefits. We're going to do all these other things. And then, life did get easier. But your point's well taken, Mike. We got to keep going from the ground up because we have to be able to demonstrate what we're talking about, right? Kellen.
This is maybe a question that gets answered over time too, if there isn't an example to provide for it. But a question that I've been having is, I like this point about getting away from like government contracts and procurement as a strategy for sustainability. And I'm wondering if that sort of puts pressure on social co-ops to appeal to the public through like forms of social purchasing, or somehow making an appeal to the public to engage with these, or to purchase from cooperatives because of the community benefit that they are attempting to deliver. I guess my question is like, how do you make that appeal, which seems like it could easily happen in sort of a moral way. Purchase from us because this is our mission, this is who we serve. how do you sort of tell that story as a co-op without reproducing a narrative about the community as victimized and therefore in need of your dollars, which
That's a
like
good
I
question.
guess runs the risk of furthering a narrative about that group as helpless, in need of charity, and so forth.
That's a great question. I have a thought on that, but I'll let Matthew offer one if he's got one.
Yeah, just a quick, really super down to earth actually thought there, Kellen. And great question. I would suggest, and something I really noticed just in doing some of my own background research, like if you just look at, this is going to sound a little, I don't know, millennial of me or something, but basically, if you go on Instagram, go to the Instagram page of like Noah's Ark, and I'll drop the link, but like the Noah's Ark Social Cooperative, for example, like you look at their social media and you see the like how it is that they speak to the public about what they're doing. I think they've been very intentional about that very question, about like they know this could be taken as charitable, but instead they've really emphasized the solidaristic aspect of like these are people who have dignity and they do work with dignity in spite of and because of the disabilities that they're overcoming in the process of generating that kind of dignified labor for themselves. So I think presenting it as opportunity that is being seized by people who we would otherwise just call disabled has been, I think, really powerful in terms of like their social messaging. So I'll drop a link so you can see an example of it.
Thank you.
You know, I'll just add that I am struck by the fact that in the Italian context, the way they present to the public is from a different angle. It really is not so much about solving social issues in the way you were suggesting, Kellen. They lead with something else, which I'm about to get to, and I'm eager to hear what people think about it. Again, I mentioned they're about social innovation. They're saying, you know what? You know, you think all the smart guys are developing apps in Silicon Valley. There's another kind of innovation, and we're good at it. We're great at it. And in fact, we're really solving amazing problems with these amazing solutions. And that's what our social co-op is all about. So they kind of move away from just talking about the problem and instead sort of promote themselves as contributing something that is otherwise missing from the local community. And so that's one angle or one way of framing it. And in fact, I want to get to that in this next slide and just throw this open just a little bit, because this has to do with an experience I had just a couple of days ago. This is a book that came out about 4 or 5 years ago. The Innovation Delusion is the title. How Our Obsession with the New Has Disrupted the Work That Matters Most. Matthew, you got to go? Okay. Thanks, man. The work that matters most is, and I would offer for this group, is the core economy. In other words, it's the care economy, but it's also been identified as the core economy because it's the thing, it's the system of maintenance, repair, and care that is constantly running, turning over, bubbling, keeping everything going. And disruptive tech culture is one of the ways we have been distracted away from attention to these processes of maintenance and care, and has in fact devalued them. So I'll report this just briefly. I was in a webinar a day or two ago with a tech guy, a tech investor. I had a particular curiosity about what he was going to say, and he was talking about exponential organizations. And the thing that he was suggesting was that big organizations, this includes Apple, Google, everybody, are going to be breaking down. They're going to be falling into pieces. There's going to be a disruption. It's going to be a kind of creative disruption, which is what people always say. And in that conversation, he was asked naturally, so what are the obstacles to this? And the obstacles are, insofar as there are any, I guess, there are people who don't like change. And so his point was, when in every organization, you got all these people defending their territory. They're really kind of against change and against innovation. And that's why we have consultants who do something called change management. This is one of the most wonderful euphemisms ever coined, because as I remember it from my own kind of bloody work experience, change management is when the consultants come in and say, we're laying everybody off in this room. That's the bad news. The work is going abroad somewhere, but we have a great benefit exit program for you. Well, and so in essence, what the speaker was saying is that there are going to be people that are just going to have to go away. Because in a disruptive economy, not everybody is going to be able to handle what is coming. And the thing that occurs to me is that in the care economy, this is what I learned from John Rostakis, we have millions of people working in precarious labor who are both going to be automated and commodified out of their livelihoods. And that is because they are considered collateral damage. We're dealing with a very powerful force here, right? We are watching what is happening as the new administration puts more and more people in control of the levers who come from this, what's been called the California ideology. So as the speaker a couple of days ago said, we have to do this. There is no alternative. It's either Star Trek or Mad Max, which was kind of amazing. But it's an ideology of change. There are no limits on it. It is moving fast. It's breaking things. And the speaker, by the way, made, I thought, a remarkable statement. From his point of view, he felt that tech was, in fact, the only driver of progress in the world. Now, this is quite a remark. This is a big investor, Silicon Valley investor, a very notable guy. I'm just, for politeness sake, not mentioning who it is, because it doesn't matter who it is. He's a spokesman for something much bigger than himself. But what he's saying is that if tech is the only progressive force in the world, the only driver of progress, doesn't that mean politics is dead? I think from his point of view, politics is dead. There's no point in even talking about it. And by politics, of course, he really means, the federal system. And everything else is just going to have to go away, or rather, everything else is going to have to be secondary to the meritocratic, technocratic management that will decide the public good. So that is what is also behind this care economy conversation. It's the question, the debate between genuine innovation, including social innovation, which is a good thing, that is a real thing, versus kind of innovation speak and these other kind of ideological currents that are flowing. So as you can tell, I'm feeling a little exercised about this at the moment, but I bet some of you have a few thoughts on the subject also, such as Ramy.
Indeed. Good morning, and good morning here from interior Alaska. And so with a little bit of that orientation of latitude and longitude, and then also the kind of figurative, where on earth are we with all of this? I've included a bunch of links, and I'll hit and enter those. I'm going to hit the top of some waves here. Around 2008, it's estimated that the global population of human beings became more associated with urban environments than with rural. That would be the first time in Homo sapiens' existence on Earth. That was sometime in 2008. The baby boom generation, which is basically limited to North America, the United States, Canada, to Europe, to England, and to Australia. The rest of the world's baby boom generation is a very different demographic reality. That baby boom generation for the North American entity started turning 65, started aging in 2011, 2012, and then it became quickly 10,000 people per day turning 65. Now, Canada is dealing with what Trump is doing with tariffs. Canada also is facing that I think it's about a little over $1 trillion in the next 2 years will be transferring from the baby boom generation to the millennial generation, primarily through mortgages, through estates, through housing. Also now, between February and this year and the end of 2026, a full 3/4 of Canada's mortgages are up for renewal. Now, look at what's happening to the tariffs, to that economy, to the stability that people are trying to make as we all now are 10 years, 12 years deeper into that baby boom generation. And then as Arctic nations, Canada, yeah, Alaska, well, the United States, yeah, we know the Scandinavian, but we have UAE as well and China. So with Russia doing what Russia's doing and Europe going through what Europe's going through and the youth of Africa, when we're looking at then these choices and these conversations that we're making, and then really listening to communities that are trying to today save their homes, they are today trying to find healthcare, they are today trying to look after one another. The next few years in these conversations about social co-ops will themselves, and need to be, in my opinion, stay very elastic and reflexive, because the numbers will continue to change. That we can count on.
Very good. Very good. Other thoughts? I realize this is something so big to think about. It's hard to wrap your mind around it when you're watching the news or reading the news and thinking about what we're seeing underway here. But it is striking that this sort of technocratic cultural move that's going on has been in the works for, as we know, for a very long time, but it has never directly, I think, been in a place to say we are replacing politics.
But haven't systems done that before to cultures?
Systems do it. Systems do it. Yes.
Yeah, and so aunties and uncles and grandparents, like we know how to respond to this. We, as human beings, we have responded to this time and time and time and time again.
Yes.
We're in this particular time right now where we get to really amplify the voices of community members, and in ourselves, maybe we don't have the professional, esteem that maybe we're expected to have over the next 10, 20 years, but we do get to support the room that's made for those that are 23 years old today to then turn 33 and 43, then benefiting from all the work that we're doing. That's what I'm really encouraged by.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to step on
Let's
you.
see. No problem. Stas, I think it is.
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, Stas. Yeah, I've watched some of these recordings before, but I'm happy to be here live today. It's a really interesting conversation. I guess, so one thing, I'm one of the founders of a worker co-op that does care labor, coaching support nationally here in the US. And we've been talking a lot about this question of how does automation technology relate specifically to care labor, and what aspects of care labor are kind of fundamentally human and not really things that technology can effectively take over. I'm thinking about the way that kind of AI therapy has kind of failed pretty amazingly. And there's a lot of conversations about what kind of human labor can be and can't be kind of replaced by technology. And I think that some forms of care labor specifically are things that we're going to find that technological innovation is just not really able to fill in the gaps around the need for human connection, for things that I think, maybe I don't know exactly how far technology can develop, decades from now, but I think that there's maybe a missing link around a lot of things that seem like secure jobs, things like being a lawyer, being an accountant, those seem like things that are actually more effectively replaced by technology and AI than care labor. So that's what we've been talking about as a team recently. And I think what you were talking about is particularly the role of kind of reproductive labor through a feminist lens. How does kind of the current capitalist economy center kind of masculinized productive labor and see that as the primary type of labor that we're thinking about automating, and kind of intentionally invisibilize the reproductive labor, the kind of informalized care labor, how much of it is in the gray economy, how much of it is informal. How does technology automation actually create a pathway for more care labor to be formalized and be brought into the economy as the thing that technology can't replace. And so that's what we've really been talking about as a team. And so an interesting dynamic is I'm Italian and African American. I was born in Italy. I didn't know so much about social co-ops in Italy. And I was talking to my dad and he was like, oh yeah, you know, your uncle, all of these friends and family members work in social co-ops.
Wow,
I thought that you
really?
knew that when you founded a co-op. And I was like, what are you talking about?
That's great.
So something that I'm wondering is how exactly would the social co-op model translate to the political system in the US? Because there are things like, you know, employment law, you can't say that you're only hiring certain type of people. We're a worker co-op, we are committed to social good. How would you think about like what the core pillars of social co-ops in Italy would look like within the kind of political restrictions of the United States, for a group that is a worker co-op that, you know, intentionally chose not to be a nonprofit, but is most often seen as similar to nonprofits? And we just had a webinar last month that had over 150 people attend, where we were talking about why we're a worker co-op and not a nonprofit. And a lot of what came up for people was just, how do you sustain a revenue model that doesn't depend on government, you know, grants and other things, when you're working with communities that don't have as much money for revenue? And anyway, so I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm really curious about what this social co-op model would look like in the US. And I feel like there are things that we do that would match that, but I'm wondering kind of what would you consider as the core pillars that would make a social co-op operate kind of effectively in the US?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and we've often said in this community of practice, you know, we're not meeting to share a cookbook that's already been published. We are sharing recipes, trying to figure out what we're talking about here. So there's not a quick answer to your great question. But I mean, we do know that it's something. If the Italian model seems to be the most vibrant out there, it's partly because they have done a great job on this social innovation thing. They create something you can't get easily elsewhere. And they do that through a particular process, which is not the way most nonprofits operate in this country, co-creation. You know, they can be somewhat democratic and they can use some elements of co-creation, but it's not to the extent typically that you would find it maybe in these other models. And then the other thing is, I want to make this point earlier. You know, I do get that you want independence, and therefore getting out of government contracting is a step in that direction. But which government? I think it's a little bit of a good question to consider that really, for the most part, in the Italian context and elsewhere, you're talking about local government, not the feds. So if you're dealing with your local government, in essence, your own neighbors, potentially there's a chance that the co-creation can include them. And the reason you would want to do that is not only because they could be a source of funding and they might want to just push this over, you know, onto your plate from their plate, but also, you know, they could be valuable local partners with local knowledge in the process. So I think that's more of the Italian mentality. And maybe we need to be flexible enough to realize that total autonomy is maybe just too difficult and maybe not desirable, you know? So other thoughts on that? Estonia. No, we've not gotten to Estonia. I can tell you that, Remy.
Well, we're finding that there's interesting ways to explore. I don't want to be too prescriptive with this, but I'm happy to follow up. There's ways to explore the use of some of the interoperability of the data packages and personal health and locations and social networks and all of that with some different blockchain models that allow just the simple acknowledgement and not necessarily the direct evaluation of what that acknowledgement of a transaction or an engagement, so that when individuals are dealing with some very sensitive, prideful, maybe, you know, whatever those very personal things are, that there's still a way to engage with kind of where the directions of the data sovereignty and where all the health records and fire preparedness, as we've seen in LA, and so there's a lot of different overlap where individuals themselves are finding ways to try to understand how blockchain can be a point of engagement rather than a point of establishing value. And then in the personal relationships in real life, though, that's supported then to support the value of what that relationship is, particularly.
Yep. Christina makes a good point about the variation among states on this, whether you have home rule or not. Sometimes people are not aware that they might live in a state or even in a town where they don't really have home rule. So those are important factors, no doubt. But jumping back to Stas for a moment, could you say what your co-op is, the care co-op you were describing, and give us a link if you could?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll add it to the chat in a moment. So
Great.
we're called Spring Up. We have 9 team members all over the country. We do peer coaching. It's interesting you were talking about restorative justice. We're all our backgrounds are all in restorative justice and transformative justice. We do conflict mediation and support teams in kind of consent-based decision making and collaboration. We work mostly with kind of grassroots organizing movements around the US. And we have an online school, Blue Light Academy of the Liberatory Arts.
Amazing. This is why it's great to have these community of practice kind of things. You discover there's all this great work going on. You just never heard of it. Okay. It's just a ton of stuff going on. Makes me happy. I'd love to see your link if you could drop it in for us, Stas, and we'll follow up. Okay, we just got a few minutes left. Or any other big thoughts on all these big ideas we've thrown out here? There's great stuff in the chat, so keep reading there if you're not, and save the chat. Yeah, Abe's making a great point here. Okay, and time to spring up. Cool. Yes. Hey, Mac, good to see you again. Mac is mentioning the doc film Join or Die on which goes into the Italian context from a few years ago. Yeah, Abby is right. We are making a lot of this up as we go along, which is kind of where we are, because we don't know how to do this particular thing that a number of other societies just seem to do so readily, but we need to, it's one of many kinds of skills we've got to reskill ourselves in. Let's see, I will mention that this research report that Matthew and I and Kellen and some other people here have been working on for a while is coming together, and probably somewhere around the March timeframe, as we say, is going to get published. And it's going to be a substantial, over 100-page document on social co-ops from a number of different angles. But I think that may be a useful way to further this conversation, because we can begin to say, here's a white paper that goes into some real detail, looks at other cultures, other countries, and also makes some recommendations for what we could do here. Erica, you're making a point here about, yes, exactly. Erica has the good luck to be in Italy, like all the time, in Naples. Yeah, Erica, go ahead and make your point.
Yeah, like I'm right now speaking to you from a periphery of Naples, from a neighborhood that feels very much abandoned, right, by the state. There's no care for the people. There's no care for how much people are making, how much they're paying for rent here, how much they're spending actually on their healthcare, because it seems like it's free, but it's not entirely free for people. And I think that's really pushing that this trust in the government, in the local government, of always feeling like it's abandoning the residents. That's probably pushing people to come together in the co-ops that have become so popular here. And also for younger people looking for jobs. I have lots of friends that tried to get into the medical field. it's really hard to get into university, really hard to get into this field, and they are getting certificates. And when they come out of those courses that they're taking, the best place for them to find jobs is actually with the co-ops. They're getting the sort of jobs and the sort of wages and the care that even the public system that should be able to offer those jobs is actually not doing. And so it's, again, the co-ops bringing the resources that the government is not able to provide, and people coming together when they're left to their own means, really.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I like what she said, but can that be true in the United States? Like, we're working on creating a CNA cooperative, and so will that be true with our students coming out of like CNA school, getting their certificate, that it will be easier for them to be a co-op member than to go get a job working for a nursing home or a hospital and get paid better in our co-op?
That's good. By easier, you mean there'll be a sufficient number of jobs that there's like an option? Because there cannot be very many CNA co-ops, unfortunately, right? Is that what you mean, Maya?
Well, I liked what she said, is that the younger people in the country are having a harder time getting a job as a health professional, but they've gone to school and they've got these certificates, but it's easier for them to get work and a better pay coming right out of school to become a member of a co-op. So I was asking her, is that true in the United States too?
Well, we can safely say not yet.
Yeah, probably not yet. I do know that we're doing a lot of research into like home care and home health cooperatives that tend to be like a major deal right now with the ICA group incubating and working with all of the co-ops, but I don't think that's the reality yet in the US.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's part of what we're pushing for with this group. We do have little experiments that are beginning, like the work that the ICA group is doing that Erica mentioned and so on, but we don't have the landscape of operating co-ops. And yes, as Christina points out, there's also universal healthcare, which helps in Italy. We don't have those things yet. So we're still in the early building phase, no doubt about it. All right. Any other thoughts here?
Well, I just left a note in the chat and I'm going to have to peel away here. There's a number of different persons in different disciplines, different countries that know that they don't want to stay a part of this conversation. They need to translate what we're all coming up with into their own communities and workplaces. So I'm a part of different conversations of different groups doing that. So should anybody in the sciences or care, or especially with the United States government and the funding sources and everything going on right now, we got some really interesting opportunities because people just got kind of a concussive event to make them aware of just how dependent and how the opportunities we have to be codependent in those positive ways to encourage one another through our vulnerable times. So this is a good time to see each other through.
I agree.
Thank you all so much.
All right. Yes, thanks from me and Erica and Kellen also. It's great to see everybody. Great conversation. We'll be back in 1 month, and possibly by that point we'll have Davide ready to go to talk about his co-op Pandora in Milan, but we'll keep you posted on that. So thanks to all, and we'll be back at you. Peace. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Hi, Elias. Thank you.